morning. Welcome to this gathering of Journey Imperfect Faith community. My name is Christina and I'm a journeyer. It's important to say that you are welcome here in this space, no matter your skin color, your sexuality, your political beliefs or none, your religious beliefs or none. You are welcome in this space. You are God's beloved. So, journeyers give, we invite you to consider how you give to Journey Imperfect Faith community this morning. 10% of everything we bring in, we give back out to the community and to people who support our missions of mercy, justice, and kindness. So we invite you to give financially to Journey this morning. If you need more information on that, please go to our website at journeyifc.com. So Rick is going to start a Lent series this morning called This Beautiful Mess, which I think is particularly poignant this week as we are coming out of a mess. For many of you, this has been a very, very difficult week. No power, no internet, no water, no heat. What a mess. What a mess. And so actually, we usually breathe at the end. I actually invite you all now to let's just take a minute. I'm sitting in the stillness of this snow. It's very quiet. I invite you to take a minute too and really settle into the space. Let's breathe. Let's breathe again. Each week leading up to Easter Sunday, you will hear from both Rick and some of Journey's ordained ministers about the mess of life. And this week, Rick is going to talk about, Rick, what's your title?
Your Beautiful Messy Way.
That's right, Your Beautiful Messy Way. So as we settle into this Lent season, to this time of going inward, coming out of the mess of this week, let's invite God to show us what we have to learn in this space as we hear Rick, as we commune together over the airwaves. Welcome. You are welcome here in this space.
We're going to see part of a TED Talk by the British artist Charlie Maxey, who is amazing. If you've seen his books, his art, it's big. This is a gorgeous book. Get it. It's not just for children, of course. And he's going to talk about making a mess and celebrating it. So let's hear this wisdom from this man.
When I first started drawing, my best friend was killed. And my immediate response was just like Forrest Gump was to begin drawing. It was my only way of sort of making sense of the existence, I think. And I drew in London for a long time on streets and just drew buildings. And I remember a woman came up to me with 2 children, and she stopped and she looked at what we were doing, and then for a while didn't say anything and then walked away. And I heard her say to her children, "That's what happened to you if you don't do your homework." And I did find it funny, on the basis that I probably hadn't done my homework. My life has just been spent drawing. And I remember when I was 20, I've only met I don't know if you've ever met any members of the royal family, you probably have, but I've only met them once, and I met them all together, which is a bit terrifying. And it was at a party. And when I don't know, you're not really meant to speak to the Queen unless she speaks to you, and I kind of did. And I really screwed up. Like the one time I met the Queen, I really made a mess of it, twice in one evening. And I was feeling terrible about it. And right at the end of the night, I don't know why, I was at this do, anyway, long story. And I was walking down a long corridor, and there were paintings, and I was looking at the paintings. I was quite drunk. And I was looking at these paintings, portraits, and and I saw a tiny figure at the end of the corridor. So I kept walking. It was about 12, maybe half 12 at night. And as she came close, I realized it was the Queen Mother. And it was just me and her in this long corridor. And she looked at me, and she said hello. And she's really tiny. And she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Charlie, and I'm really sweaty, and I'm really sorry." And I was really unkempt and quite drunk. And she said, "Oh, that's okay." And she said, "Have you had a nice night?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, I really kind of screwed up with your daughter." And she said, "Well, what have you done?" I said, "Well, I got nervous and said things that I shouldn't have done." And then the less she replied, the more I spoke. And eventually she reversed and went away. And I did it again, but worse. And anyway, she said something to me which kind of changed. Well, it was a seminal sentence in my life. She just said, "Everyone is messy, Charlie. You all mess up." And I said, "Yes, you're right." And then she was smiling at me, and they said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I draw. I try to draw." And she said, "That's a very brave thing to do." And it was like getting hit with a wet fish in the face, because I'd never considered it as a brave choice. I just did it like Forrest Gump walked. I drew. And I said, "Do you think so?" She said, "Yeah, I think it's a courageous choice. And I wish you all the courage." And I can't remember how she concluded, but she just wished me well. But be brave, she said, and carry on making a mess. It's fine. Joanne asked me to talk about one little thing, which is this summer I spent a month with a Holocaust survivor called Morris, who I'd been asked to teach him to draw. I didn't know he's a Holocaust survivor. Until, into one of the drawings we're doing, I said, "Why don't you sort of draw something from your childhood?" And he started drawing a barrack. And he said, "Oh, I helped build this." And I said, "Oh, where was that, a farm building?" He said, "No, this was in Plaszow. This was in a Polish concentration camp where I was." And over 4 weeks, he hadn't really ever spoken of this time. He never spoke, but as he drew, he started drawing the steps, the sewage system, a couple of his friends, an SS guard. He drew these things, and bit by bit, his emotions followed. And again, it was one of the greatest privileges I've ever had to see someone access what they felt and get it out. And this is a school, and I remember I'm talking about people who are in their 80s, but I think this process has to begin when you're 8 or 5 or 4. But why is there such a huge chasm often between the end of school, or when an art teacher, bless them, or whatever, or a system says, "Okay, you're not so good at this, try that." And what you do until you're 8 is you abandon a very valid, important process that you could have kept going. You could have kept doing it, but because you didn't quite make the grade, you lost it until you end up in an old people's home and some idiot like me comes along and says, "Try this." But what a pity that is. And for me, all I would say is that I think, if we can, I was doing a class the other day with lots of 10-year-olds, and we were talking about imagination, and I said, how do you enjoy your imagination? We thought it was wonderful, because the kids would say, "Well, when I'm in a lesson, the teacher's talking about this, I can just imagine that I'm skiing, and it's incredible. And actually I've got wings, and the snow is pink." And so we just went off on this whole imaginative thing, and I said, "What happens? Do you think you'll always have this imagination? Will it always be there?" And the boy at the back just put his hand up and said, "No." And I said, "Well, why do you think that is?" He said, "Well, you grow up." "And what happens when you grow up?" "Well, look at my parents, they haven't got an imagination." And I said, why does that happen? Would you like for that not to happen? And they said, "Yeah, we'd like to keep it." And I said, "Well, how do you think you're going to keep your imagination alive? How are you going to keep imagining pink snow? How are you going to keep using this incredible thing the human brain has? How can we keep that going?" And we had this huge debate about it, with the conclusions were obviously legion, and they all had their own ways of doing it. All I can say is, don't stop making your messy drawings. Just because we talked about art, so don't give up just because it's not your subject. Don't give up. Just keep your mind alive to everything that you anyway. So we went on like that. So what I'm saying is, I don't want it to be a a chasm between, oh, I did that at school, oh, now I'm in an old people's home and I suppose I should try. What a waste of that time. Because in that time, I'm not saying you have paintings in the Royal Academy, I'm just saying you enjoyed making things. And for your brain, it's really healthy, like proven so, and wards off Alzheimer's, singing, painting, drawing, all those things. I think I've bored you enough. And I don't think it's very conclusive. I only really came here to say that whole idea of making a mess is fine. And be free to do it. Relish the mess. And from the mess will come, in the end, beauty. But it doesn't really matter if it doesn't. And just have the courage to do it. And I think with schools, there should be an amnesty. A day a month. Where there is nothing is graded. Where all art, whatever you're doing, is not great. You just make a mess. Reckless. That'll be it.
Hey kids, do you know what you want to be when you grow up? Maybe you want to be a doctor, or a police officer, or a football player.
Did you know that no matter what you are when you grow up, that you have a chance to change the world?
We'll learn all about this today,
as we take a look at how Jesus picked his first disciples. Jesus picked regular people to follow him.
Back in Jesus' day, there were people called Pharisees, and they knew a lot about the Bible and God.
You would think Jesus would pick those kind of guys to be his first followers, right?
Well, he didn't. He picked a bunch of regular guys. In fact, most of them were fishermen.
That'd be like picking a plumber for your doctor, but he chose them on purpose.
Jesus gave his followers a mission right away. He wanted them to know what they were getting into.
See, they weren't going to get rich or famous following Jesus.
But he was going to use them for big things. Memory verse.
Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." When Jesus first called them, he told them he would teach them how to fish for people. What in the world does that mean?
Well, it means that he was going to teach them to make even more followers.
Jesus made 12 regular guys his main disciples. See, Jesus had a lot of disciples. Those were his faithful followers.
But he picked 12 guys to be his main disciples.
They were Peter, James, John,
Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew,
Matthew, Thomas, James,
Thaddeus, Simon, and Judas.
And they would go out and teach in temples, on the streets, and anywhere else to help bring people to Jesus.
That's Heidi. Hi, Heidi. She's wearing a plastic bag on her foot around a bandage that we had to put on after we changed the bandage that the vet put on because she was out playing in the yard in the snow and she cut her foot on the bottom of her foot. And she had to have stitches. And just now she had to go back out in the snow so she could use the potty because the girl's got to do that. Okay, do you see that my garage here in Santa Fe is a mess? Well, I mean, we've only been here 2 weeks, so it's not that strange. At least the boxes in the house are unpacked, and I think I know where some of, or most of my clothes are. I know where my office stuff mostly is. My books are mostly put away in the bookshelves here. The garage has been waiting to get done, as you see, partly because it's cold and I've been saving the job of really imposing order. I mean, I got my shelves up, the ones that were in our garage in Austin, and put stuff in, but it's not in the right order to satisfy me. And then on top of that, I've got some over here, writing files and sermons and all that kind of stuff. But then here's a bunch of Goodwill stuff and more boxes that I need to get to the recycling place. And here is, those little white things are racks that I'm gonna put up that we had in Austin to hang, brooms and shovels and all that kind of stuff. I don't really like this. I can't work. I can't get things done, and I've got a couple of doorknobs to replace and some hinges on the kitchen cabinets that just are old and beat up or whatever, and that's part of moving in and getting settled and figuring out where you want to be and how you want to live, and I can't get anything done. And yet, this mess is giving me the opportunity to rethink some things. Like, do I really want all of those tools like that? Do I really even need them? Or there's some stuff in here that I haven't looked at in a long time, and I'd really like to write about it. I'd like to look back into it. And I'd forgotten about it. It took getting it out and having it just sit there for a week and looking at it to make me think about what it could be now in this next season of my life. And also, I'm going to be hanging some shelving, which enables me to put some tubs and Christmas stuff. That's Christmas stuff. Up high and out of the way. And I had to wait for a new little stud finder machine tool to come, because the one I've had forever is old and beat up and broken down and dead. All of that just means that this mess is making room for an experiment of what it's going to be like to live in this house here in Santa Fe for this season. It's a mess. It's a good mess. It's inviting me to think in different ways and to experiment and to see what might happen if I stop doing things the way I was doing them before, or maybe decide. One of my very favorite painters, and maybe yours too, is Jackson Pollock, who was born in the early 20th century, lived only until his mid-40s. He was the youngest of 5 brothers, wanted attention, felt overlooked. His father was an abusive alcoholic who left the family. They started out, I think, in Wyoming, and then ended up in California and Arizona. Jackson's older brother, one of them, was an artist, and Jackson had gone to a high school and gotten expelled, and then went to another one and got expelled. Went with his older brother to go study at an art institute. One of the people that they studied with was the artist Thomas Hart Benton, who's wonderful. Oh my gosh, just amazing, strange, powerful, vivid art. Agriculture, people engaged in real life. And Jackson was just learning to figure out what it meant to explore his own feelings and his thoughts through his art. And he was chaotic inside. There was a lot going on inside that young man. He had already begun his alcoholism as a young adult. And he was struggling. What was his message going to be? How was he going to discover who it is that he wanted to be and how he wanted to communicate what was inside of him? So he was experimenting and trying different things and working on different things. And then World War II came, and the New Deal, which enabled artists to go and try things and be employed and do beautification and building and creation and all of those amazing things that came out of that period. And Jackson Pollock was part of the experimentation, and he was hired to paint a gorgeous mural, and then some more people noticed him, and then Peggy Guggenheim noticed him, and he got commissioned to paint a mural for her, I don't know, entry hall or something in her mansion. Goes on to become one of the most important painters of the 20th century in the movement called abstract expressionism. He discovers, invents, steps into this process of saying that he wants to be in the painting, and so he puts the painting against a hard surface, a wall or the floor. And you've seen the pictures of him bending over, kneeling on, standing on his canvases on the floor and dripping paint and mixing sand and not using brushes, using sticks and all different kinds of tools to somehow get the paint and the color and the designs and the expression of what was inside of him onto the canvas. He even after a while stopped using regular titles, even like red composition and much more than like a deep, meaningful hollowness at the top of a mountain, you know what I mean? And just started using numbers or dates. read number 4, whatever. The idea being, he wanted to invite people into their own experience of this seeming chaos. At one point, somebody came and visited his studio. He was in New York, where all the painters are, right? And all the art critics and all of the agents and all the art dealers, and he didn't like that. And so he met this woman who was an artist, and they fell in love, and they moved out to Long Island, way, way out, away from people, and they bought an old house and a barn, and he turned that barn into his studio, and they cooked, and they entertained friends, and they worked in their garden and made art. At one point, somebody came out and visited his studio and said, "Man, it doesn't look like it's all that hard just to drip paint all over a canvas." And he looked up and dabbed a brush into some paint and flicked it. And one drop landed on the doorknob. Just one. And Jackson Pollock looked at this person who was full of self-righteous criticism and said, "You do that." He became a master craftsman. He was also a very unhappy person. He was also chaotic in the way that he lived his life. He had a happy and then unhappy marriage. His alcoholism grew worse and worse. He went to therapy that helped, and then it didn't help. He was angry and sad. He dive-bombed his marriage. And then at 44, he drove extremely intoxicated and crashed his car not far from their house, killed a woman who was with them, and he died too. So what do you do with trying to decide whether there was meaningful beauty in Jackson Pollock's being here on the planet? What do you do with trying to decide what was good about what he brought to the world? I think it's a real question. I think it matters. I think that question matters. His life was not tidy. It was a mess. Was it a good life? Was it a meaningful life? He created some of the most important art of the 20th century. And here in the 21st century, he's regarded as maybe one of the greatest artists in all of American history. And he was a disaster in many ways. So were Jesus's people. You saw the kids in the video talk about how Jesus called his disciples. Jesus had many disciples, 12 of whom he picked as a kind of symbolic new Israel, because Israel had 12 tribes historically. And so he picks 12 men to embody those 12 tribes because he's making a new Israel. But he also had many, many other followers, women, lots of children, obviously. If you look at the scriptures, there were kids all around. Sometimes he'd interrupt himself and say, "Let's just play with the kids for a little while. I'm just going to sit for a minute. Quit being so important. Disciples, quit being so important." The scriptures make it clear, and now reading them, it seems to me from this perspective, where we're at and what we know about the technology of understanding human behavior and thinking, personality, there had to be disciples with alcoholism and addiction and rage. There had to be disciples who were full of doubt, fear, prejudice against people who were different from them, against women. There had to be disciples who were egomaniacal and obsessed with their own power because of their own insecurities. How do I know this? Because it's in the scripture. in one form or another. Either the hints are there or it's overt. I'm not just talking about Judas, the quote-unquote bad guy, who I don't see that way, based on my understanding of what his role is, right? I'm talking about everybody else. They have what we call demons, what the scriptures call demons, what Jackson Pollock had, what I have, what you have, which is we're a mess. We're broken. We got hurt, and we hurt ourselves, and we hurt other people. And what I want to suggest about Lent this year, and what I want to suggest about what the scriptures say about God is that the mess has great beauty in it. I feel very confident that this will become usable and workable, but I'm never going to have it be perfect. I like to have things labeled, and I like to have things in their proper place. And at the same time, I also want to have permission just to make a mess and try something new and create and learn. And I think that's a big part of what Jesus is doing with his followers. He's saying, okay, we're here. Let's try something. And he calls some poor people, and he calls some business people, and there are some important rich women, and there are some nobodies, and there are some very proper churchy people, and there are some scummy tax collectors and prostitutes, and so on and so on and so on. And he's doing this on purpose to say, I want there to be a mess here. And I'm not sure, I don't think Jesus always knows what's going to happen. He's really good at reading the room. I think that he just says, okay, God, here we go. Let's see what you make of this. He believes that God's going to be there. Excuse me. He knows God will be present. And then he says, okay, here we go. Keep your hand and feet inside the ride at all times. Everybody hang on. I think that Jesus' sense of God being present is tied to his sense that things will not be pretty or perfect, and things will be messy, and he will have to learn things just like everybody else will have to learn things, and he throws everybody in the deep end of the pool, including himself, and he believes that God will be present, and he's willing to create a path for himself and everybody else that is full of risk and uncertainty. I think that when God creates, God is experimenting. I mean, I think that natural selection and evolution are just lots and lots of experiments, that, you know, trillions of experiments that go on for millions and millions of years. I think God is the author of that, right? That's what God is like. Well, let's see what happens. Well, let's roll the dice. Yeah, but what if things aren't perfect? Things will never be perfect. It is not possible for your life or my life to be perfect in the sense of happy all the time. There is no such thing. So I invite you to be willing to make a mess, as Charlie Maxey said, and I invite you to be willing not to know the answer, and I invite you to be willing to make room, which for me is what Lent is about. Allowing and opening and making room for suffering, for uncertainty, for fear, for experimenting, for seeing what will happen, and for expecting God to be present. Let's try it out, shall we?